To her surprise, she realized she had never tried. In fact, the thought had never even occurred to her at all. She simply had to try. Grabbing her thighs for leverage, she took a deep breath, then expelled it as she curled forward, lowering her head to her nethers. She came to a stop a few inches away from her target, and even sticking her tongue out, she couldn't quite reach. She sat up again, slightly encouraged despite her failure. She had gone close enough that she knew it was possible. It was just a matter of logistics. She knew from her own experience that the best way to achieve a new position was to utilize one's body weight, and with the most of opponent's weight concentrated in their lower half, a new approach might just do the trick. Rolling onto her back, she kicked her hind legs into the air and lowered them to either side of her head, giving her a direct view of her vagina. Reaching up with her forelegs, she grabbed her hips, locking herself in position for another attempt. Already, she was about the same distance from her opening as she had been before, and this time she had room to breathe. Reaching with her tongue, she was almost surprised to feel it brush against her clit. She jolted, her body instinctively trying to uncurl itself. With an excited half-giggle, she re-secured her grip on her hips and craned her neck even further, sticking her tongue out as far as it would go, until, finally, she felt it brush against her lower lips. She had tasted her juices before, of course, but only off of her hoof. Tasting herself directly from the source was different, somehow. Maybe even better. Or perhaps it was just the thrill of accomplishment. Regardless of the explanation, she began licking herself, feeling her folds parting beneath her tongue, the taste and smell of her arousal filling her mind. She barely even noticed herself whimpering and moaning through the fog of pleasure as she began to eat herself out. Gone were the thoughts of Thunder Lane, her pleasure, the focus it took to give that pleasure, and the thrumming excitement of the whole situation, of knowing that she was doing what few mares could, combined to form a storm in her mind that left little room for such distractions. As much as she liked Thunder Lane, a distraction was all he was at this moment, when all the world seemed to revolve around her act of self-pleasure. Said act of self-pleasure, however, was starting to take its toll on her back. She licked for as long as she could, feeling the first approach of an orgasm, but eventually the discomfort overcame the pleasure. With an annoyed grunt, she uncurled herself, lying on the floor and taking a moment to catch her breath. She spent that moment savoring the lingering taste of her own juices on her tongue and marveling in the possibilities. She idly rubbed herself with a hoof, just enough to keep the ball rolling, to tide herself over until she could continue. And continue she would. By Celestia! She merely needed a better position. She tilted her gaze upwards, looking at the sofa behind her. Gnawing her lips, she considered it for an instant, then nodded and got to her hooves. She climbed onto the sofa, turned around, and lay down, such that her head hung off the edge. Once again, she kicked her hind legs over her head, and she felt both her hind hooves land on the floor beneath her, essentially standing. Her head now wedged between her thighs, she reached up with her forehooves and pressed her hindquarters toward her face, and was thrilled to find that her lower lips pressed fully against her upper lips with relative ease. There was still a mild discomfort, but it was trivial enough that she barely noticed it. She planted her lips around her pussy and plunged her tongue inside her with gusto, worming it inches deep into her moist opening. She felt pleasure wash over her again, picking up close to where she had left off before. The world around her vanished as she ate herself out, running her tongue over every inch of her insides that it could reach. For the sake of variety, she occasionally pulled out and merely ran her tongue over her vulva, or gave her clit an electrifying suckle. Massaging her cutie mark as she worked, she filled her apartment with muffled moans and gasps. The pleasure of it all was unlike anything she had ever experienced, even if the sheer oddness and novelty of the act were unquestionably a contributing factor. It was like normal masturbation, but somehow different. This wasn't the same as wildly rubbing herself with a hoof, or thrusting a dildo into her vagina as if it was the real thing. In those cases, the focus was on receiving pleasure, and minimal thought was required. But now, giving pleasure was just as important, the giving and receiving at once, strangely divorced and blissfully united. It was like being her own lover, a sort of sensual Mobius strip. She was getting closer now. She could feel it, like dancing near the edge of a cliff while blindfolded. She brought her forelegs through her hind legs, wrapping them around her rump and pulling herself in even deeper, hugging her own crotch against her face. It was building now, bearing down on her like a locomotive. Little twitches rippled across her body. She hummed into herself, every hum rising in animal crescendos. The scent of her arousal wafted right into her face, and her breaths, in turn, danced across her vagina, adding to the pleasure as she continued to eat herself. Then, unable to pull it off any longer, she pulled her hips down. She felt her entire muzzle slide into her vagina, allowing her to plunge her tongue deeper than ever before. With one final roll and twist of the slimy muscle, her nervous system exploded with bliss. Her body, contorted though it was, seized from the massive orgasm. She could feel her pussy spasming and squeezing around her tongue and nose as fluid spattered into her face. She screamed more violently than she ever remembered screaming before, but her body absorbed sound, the vibrations of her voice even adding fuel to the orgasmic fire. She felt something turn around and build again, only to be slammed by another orgasm. This time, her screams was more like a fillyish shriek. Even through the chaos, she sensed she wasn't done. Shifting her grip to her thighs, she withdrew her muzzle and tongue from her opening, taking a moment to breathe with her cheeks pressed against her own ass. Then, with a deep breath, she dove in once again, wrapping her lips around her clit and giving it a powerful suck. Almost instantly, a third orgasm racked her body, and a fourth followed close on its heels. She no longer had the strength to scream, instead holding on for dear life as pleasure, so powerful it nearly frightened her, had its way with her body. By now, her body was jelly, utterly spent. She suspected she still had a few orgasms in her, but even staying conscious took effort at this point. So instead, she rolled backwards, body over head, off the couch and onto the floor, falling to her rump and sprawling onto her back. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, panting for breath, all her orgasm and the sheer fact of the past 15 minutes rolling through her mind and body. And she smiled. As she started to come down from her high, she licked her juices off of her lips, then wiped the rest of her face clean with her sweat towel. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so exhausted. She imagined this was what bear maulings felt like, only it was absolutely heavenly. She knew in that moment that she would have to do this again, and frequently. Maybe not tonight though. Her back definitely wasn't happy with her, But she knew that the next time would be easier, and even more so the next time after that. She briefly wondered if she would ever be satisfied with just her hoop for a dildo after today. She shrugged it off. That would be tomorrow's problem. For now, she just wanted to take a nap. Getting off the stretching mat seemed like more trouble than it was worth. So she curled up there in the middle of the floor, gave a cute little yawn, and fell asleep, thanking the stars that she had taken up stretching all those years ago. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. I certainly did. Not that way, as in I enjoyed reading it. It was a fun read, fairly well written. Minor errors here and there, making reading a tad bit harder than it should be, but whatever. I'm used to it. Yeah, sorry again that this has to be 2 parts. It's even worse because it's just mainly Clop for 2,000 words, so someone got left hanging. Really sorry about that, but what can I do, you know? Until next time, bye bye.